Good morning. I want to thank Modi and Sabab for the invitation, for having me here today.
On that Spanish note, I would like to tell you what I'm going to do in the next 20, 30 minutes. I'm just trying to give you an overview of the health effects of vaping, and I will restrict my presentation to human data, clinical data, rather than indulging in vitro and animal studies that may not very much translate into humans. And also trying to remind me myself and yourself that unfortunately we don't have epidemiological data spanning 10, 20, or 30 years that may help us in reframing the long-term health effects of the vaping. So I would like to ask you, is anybody in this room a doctor? Can you just raise your hand? I understand you may not be a pathologist or a medical doctor. Okay, there are some. Don't be shy. Okay, I just want. I'm sure you're not a pathologist or a cytologist, but can you just understand what that is? If not, don't worry. I didn't when I first took it, so I'm ignorant as you. Well, these are macrophages taken from a bronchoalveolar lavage. And this particular staining will identify lipid Laden macrophages. Why am I talking about lipid Laden macrophages at your THR summit? Because of that. Because I remember 5 years ago when I first came to Spain trying to defend the tobacco harm reduction principle in this country, the main problem was a single case study that had an incredible spin in your media. And the funny thing was that when I studied a case study in depth, the case study was a fake. And I'll show you very quickly why. Okay, you will see the story goes that this individual was diagnosed with lipoid pneumonia. Soon after he entered the infective unit, he had a bad infection with actually was septicemia. And because it was confined in an infective unit, it's an interesting story. Okay, let's make a story rather than a boring academic style talk. And because of that, he started using electronic cigarettes. So a friend came in, he visited, look, just use this so that you can cope with your smoking habit, because it was a heavy smoker. So then came a lung CT scan, high-resolution CT scan, showing this image here, which is clearly a pneumonia. There's no doubt about that. And after the pneumonia, somebody decided, let's do bronchoalveolar lavage challenge. Let's collect those macrophages. Let's do some staining and see what happens. What happened? You know what happened. You know what happened in 2013, 14. It was signaled as diagnosed as lipoid pneumonia. However, it came to my knowledge that the guy had a previous CT scan made, and actually the previous CT scan was showing an even worse image of the pneumonia. So the pneumonia was actually occurring before the use of electronic cigarette. So next question would be, why is that? Is the diagnosis wrong? Or there were any other culprits that were causing the condition? Well, in fact, the guy had a problem with septic bone disease because of an osteoplastic cancer. And obviously, by repeating bone biopsies, you can release quite a lot of fat material in the circulation, and that probably is the cause for the diagnosis of lipoid pneumonia, which was correct, but was not correct because of the electronic cigarette use. It was correct for other causes, okay? This is the story that destroyed the vaping market in Spain, based on a single study. Okay. Let's forget all the single study case, and let's try to be more scientific in our approach. Obviously, I don't have to say, because my Spanish colleagues already reiterated the concept, there's an enormous difference that goes in between cigarette smoke and vaping aerosols. And you can see that on a 3D scatograms here. You will see that there are loads of dirt in tobacco smoke. There are a lot of chemicals. These are all different chemicals. And the color of the spikes will indicate the level, the concentration. And see what happens with the aerosol. I'm not saying it's risk-free, it's chemical-free. There are chemicals, but you will see there are fewer number of chemicals, and the spikes are not even in the red region. So that means that to my mind, but I think to anybody's logic's mind, this is a good indication that the aerosol from electronic cigarette emission are less problematic in general. The fact is that the vast majority of smokers is unable or unwilling to quit. This is a fact, we know that. Many people say, I want to quit smoking, but in reality, they would like to quit without quitting. This is becoming extremely prevalent in the EU region, as well as in the United States, and now in Iceland. As you can see from the Eurobarometer data of 2014, more than 6 million Europeans are using these products, but now we know there are over 10 million. And of course, ecigs use is much less risky than smoking, and this has been stated and reiterated by important health authorities in the UK, such as Public Health England. And they pose a sort of limit, which is the 95% less harmful compared to tobacco combustible. Whether this is the exact correct limit or not, it doesn't really matter. It's still a big reduction in terms of toxication of the body. And there are different products that you can use for this purpose. It can be electronic cigarette, can be heated tobacco, and so forth. The most important thing is here. These are combustion-free products. Anything that is devoid of combustion will not cause the same level of damage, will not cause lung cancer, will not cause COPD, will not cause cardiovascular disease. And this is very true also for the poor Indian women that cook all day using biomass fuel in their small unventilated kitchen. And they do not smoke, and they do get cancer, and they do get COPD. So it's combustion, the culprit. And there's been quite a lot of studies. People already have mentioned that there's a reduced emission from combustion-free products, and the level of reduction compared to the reference product, which is tobacco combustible, your own cigarettes, it's about 90 to 96%. If you want to review the exposure literature by looking at the effect of the impact of combustion-free products, you can either look at the exhale breath biomarkers or urinary biomarkers. This is just an example. We used first generation cig-alike. This is what you see. You start with high level of carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide are usually produced in presence of combustion. And you will see if you quit smoking or if you switch completely to electronic cigarettes, what happens is you reverse to within normal levels of carbon monoxide. If you don't, obviously, you will stay at high levels of carbon monoxide. And the same, it is being shown for the new generation products that heat tobacco. In this case, again, the volunteers were smokers who've been familiarizing with these products here, and they've been asked to come clean, which is after an overnight washout from their own cigarette. And you see, as soon as they smoke cigarette, there's a high level of CO. Instead, when they try these new generation products, nothing happens. Everything stays well below the 10 part per million threshold limit. Also, in terms of reduction of exposure, you can use urine metabolites. And this is very nice studies on 20 volunteers by Maciej Goniewicz, showing reductions for a number of metabolites which are representative of key harmful components of tobacco smoke. And the same has been reported also, this is with electronic cigarette, and this has been reported also for heat-no-burns products. But a very interesting catch in this slide is that the comparator is smoking abstinence. And this study in particular was done in a condition that we named confinement. Confinement meaning that you're locked in a clinic for 5 days and there's very little way that you can cheat. So if you've been giving this product, you're going to use the product. If you are on the abstinence arm, you're going to be abstinent. It's very difficult, you can cheat. So under this very controlled condition, it's very interesting to note that even those who are totally abstinent, they'll still have some level of risk at 5 days after quitting. So it is important to have a reference where to anchor data. Because if by any chance I wouldn't have had this smoking abstinence control arm, the picture wouldn't have looked very much interesting or reassuring at all. And as we said before, we are surrounded by chemicals. Marewa, have you used your perfume today? Yeah. Raise your hand. How many others have used perfume today? Raise your hand. Okay, too many. How many have used coffee today? Okay, you are all chemically invaded by now. Because all these substances, all these normal products, believe it or not, are loaded with chemicals. The Coca-Cola you drink is fully loaded with chemicals. So, I mean, we live in a chemical world. All it's important to understand is the dose of those chemicals. It's the dose that matters. So, just citing the chemical, it's done on the purpose of scaring people. We just need to put a threshold or a level to the dose. And that's the reason why I ask you that question about let's have a reference baseline that makes sense in real life. But there is a concern. I mean, I've just said it, okay? I'm not a promoter of these products. I promote tobacco harm reduction. But I just said it. You know, they are not risk-free. There's still some level of chemicals in these products. So I agree with my colleagues that some level of concern still exists, particularly with the long-term exposure to these products, okay? The real problem is how I'm going to investigate this very important question. And it's not easy because, for example, if you think of switching studies, one of the major problems with switching studies is that you have to take into account all the previous smoking history and all the damage that is already been created by many, many years of continuous smoking. Okay, another way to look at the adverse events or effects caused by electronic cigarettes in the realm of health effects is just by looking at acute events. Let me tell you something. Any study looking at transient changes, physiological, biological changes in even in a human model are not prognostically significant, are not telling you anything about development of the disease. The only thing why it is important to do this type of study is to assess tolerability, a bit like what Jacques does in his vaping studies and first contact with people. He assesses acute tolerability. He just records level of coughing and discomfort, and he tries to manage it. In fact, and these are the most common symptoms: throat irritation, dry cough, and other symptoms of respiratory irritation, which are captured, for example, in surveys. And what happens in these surveys, a definition of COPD is now based on a single point cross-sectional evaluation of a cough, which is supposed to be transient, and now these people have been labeled as COPD. So you will see in America, particularly in California, a lot of epidemics of young adolescents with COPD, which is by default a disease that is common in elderly people, not in young people. So there is a problem with labeling of the terms in these surveys. And as I told you before, I'm not denying that there are quite a high level of adverse events at the beginning, but these are transient. Look at the big reductions in these key, most commonly reported symptoms you see here in the ECLAT study, which was the first randomized controlled trials on electronic cigarettes. Okay, the drop is significant. That means that probably people are doing exactly what Jacques is suggesting in the vape shop. They're trying to adapt in some way, and the body adapts at the same time. It develops tolerance. The body develops tolerance to many, many different things, okay? Seneca, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, developed tolerance to poison, okay? Because he was testing a little bit, and after time, he developed tolerance. But the body is resilient to many different chemical attacks. Let's not forget that. Okay. In terms of long-term, let me tell you how we strategized this concern. We can do two ways. Either we look into vapers who never smoked in their life, which is an interesting model, but you will agree with me that these people are not easy to find. Or let's look at people who have already developed some level of disease so that they have already an abnormal baseline, and we will see what happens when they switch. Let's start with the first group, okay? I think as a model, as a clinical model, investigational model is very interesting, but I'll go straight to the conclusion. The conclusion is, after 4 years of follow-up in daily vapors, there are absolutely no early signs of any pulmonary condition, including the bloody lipoid pneumonia, okay? Not even popcorn lung disease and everything else. Of course, this is a very limited study. 4 years may not be enough to spot any difference. The study was limited in sample size. It was very difficult in 2013 to identify, we were lucky to identify 22 vapers who never smoked at that time, and we ended up 4 years later with only 12, okay? But I'm aware of large prospective studies going on right now, mostly led by tobacco industry. They are big, ambitious, and we should keep an eye on those studies. I'm aware that last week the protocol of one of these has been published. I just had a look at it, and I must say I was very impressive. I was very much impressed with the level of science and methodology that is being proposed in these studies. The other approach, as I was mentioning, is simply to review changes in health effect indicators in vulnerable population. This is a good model in my view, because you start from a already altered baseline. If you start healthy people, baseline is normal, so you don't expect anything to change unless you want to wait 10, 20, or 30 years. Here you have already a messed up baseline, and you can just try to see what's going to happen if you switch and look for harm reversal. That's the term, harm reversal. And I'm particularly interested in the model of asthma because if you think about asthmatics, these people are extremely sensible to environmental stimuli. They have very twitchy airways. So if somebody smokes next to an asthmatic, you may trigger an asthma attack. Or if ironically, if an asthmatic goes up into the Alps, up on the to ski, and they will develop asthma attack because the dry, super pure, cold air of the mountains will trigger symptoms as well. I'm not going to show you all the sets of data because I may bore you, but the conclusion is simply that we saw improved lung function, improved level of twitchiness, improved respiratory symptoms and quality of life, and these improvements were also shared in the dual users, probably because the dual users in this particular study were heavy reducers. Definition of heavy reducers is somebody who reduces more than 85% of cigarettes per day from baseline, which is like going from 1 pack to 3 cigarettes a day. And this is internet survey which Konstantinos presented a long time ago. I think he was a pioneer in the way he was designing these studies, just trying to anticipate what I was doing in the clinic, and at that time we didn't know each other. But basically, it just showed that the people interviewed in his very large survey, the survey was counting more than 19,000 respondents, and about 1,173 had asthma, medic diagnosed asthma. And when they were asked about their asthma, whether it was worse, stable, or improved, it is amazing to see the level of improvement that is being recorded in this survey. Let's go to COPD, which is the archetype respiratory disease for smokers. Smokers is frequently associated with COPD. And what happens here is, well, let's see what happens if we switch people from combustible cigarettes to these new technologies. And not surprisingly, what we saw is, again, improved respiratory exacerbation, which is very important. Respiratory exacerbation in this vulnerable population is one of the main important clinical characteristics that drives medical visits and hospitalization and worsening of the disease. So it's very important. Exacerbation in the switching population reduced by about 50%, something that we don't actually see, not even with vaccines. Then obviously there's an improvement in the quality of life. Exercise tolerance improved a lot. And there was an overall reduced disease severity according to some scoring that is used by respiratory physicians. The improvements, once again, even in this case, were seen in dual users. Once again, because these were heavy reducers. They reduced their cigarette per day from baseline by about 85%. So most of the dual users in this population were smoking no more than 4 or 5 cigarettes per day. And this is the very last follow-up, which was published a week ago. And it shows that at 36 months, the benefits of a reduction in exacerbation per year is maintained in those who are still using their electronic cigarette, whereas the smokers, the continuing to smoker population, is pretty much stable at 2 exacerbations on a yearly basis. And this is just a press release that came out in Spain in relation to this study. And again, by using the internet survey that Costantino has published a few years ago, you will see the level of improvement is immense, 84.8%. I really want to see people from pharma industry sitting in these rooms and looking at this data, because this will be extremely important. Not just because I'm saying that an electronic cigarette or new nicotine delivery technologies may be the new pharma, new treatment, but because in terms of adherence, there's enormous potential, particularly in people who stick to the products. You can imagine they can invent something like pre-dosed inhaled steroids or pre-dosed prednisone or pre-dosed salbutamol that can be used once a day in your vaping personal vaporizers. And you sort out the problem of adherence, which is massive for these people, for these patients. So how could I be wrong? Trust me, I'm a doctor. I think this slide that I keep on projecting is very important because every decision that we made today at the regulatory and political level are based on products that were on the market 5 years ago. For example, FDA keeps on misrepresenting my ECLAT study when they have to speak about smoking cessation and the importance of smoking cessation for this product, not even mentioning that those products were in the market in 2009 and went off and were taken off the market 2 years later. So they are basically relying important policy decision on products that are out of date, poor performing, and not even on the market, and then it's been not on the market for more than 6 years now. This is silly. We need to keep understanding that these products are evolving. Evolution of the products is the key. And you will see from the analytical chemical analysis that was available in 2009, and if you compare with any other chemical analysis or analytical chemistry that is being published more recently, the voyage in the quality and improvement of this of the emission on the toxicants that are present in this emission is enormous. And I cannot stop thinking that this improvement is going to improve, is going to go ahead. So in the next 5 years, we'll be talking even cleaner products. So this is a take-home message, which I'll let you read. And if you disagree with me, this is the COIR that we launched early this year, where we'll be trying to address all these questions. It's the Center of Excellence for the Acceleration of Harm Reduction at the University of Catania. And if you have questions, please don't hesitate to shoot. But don't shoot me, I'm only the speaker. I'm not the piano player.
Hi, Riccardo. I'm Dr. Attila Danko. I was curious, there was a very recent study on mouse model, unfortunately, but...
Mouse cells.
Mouse study that showed a potential benefit of nicotine for asthma. I'm just wondering if in your clinical work you've seen any evidence of that sort of over and beyond the sort of smoking cessation effects.
It's very difficult for me to comment on anything beyond smoking cessation because you're talking on isolated model which is clean. Maybe they were rendered asthmatics by giving of albumin, most probably. And I mean, it's a good idea to try and strategize nicotine in paradigmatic pharma world kind of projects. In relation to these studies is very difficult to try and see, unless you want to pick up asthmatics who are not smokers and see what happens if you give nicotine. However, I would feel extremely doubtful that the ethical review board will give us a green light there. But I would do it. I would do anything. I would start with the neurodegenerative disease, to be honest.
Riccardo, excellent talk. Thank you. Well, I would be interested, how do the effects that you observe upon switching to ecigs, to a full stop, to complete smoking cessation? Is it worse, or is it the same, or is it better?
In what way?
In terms of improvement.
In these particular patients?
Yeah.
As I
COPD,
said,
asthma.
I couldn't see any difference from dual users and exclusive users in this population.
No, but complete stop. If you have the experience probably of smokers who quit completely.
I cannot answer that question because we didn't have a control group for that in that particular study. But usually you would expect some improvement, and the literature is full of studies. They are telling you that if you quit smoking, level of exacerbation will go down, and eventually even lung function will start to recover. We didn't see any recovery in lung function, most probably because these people were a bit down their history of the disease. So maybe remodeling and chronic damage is already set in. And when you have remodeling and chronic damage, it's very difficult to reverse anything at a spirometric level.
I think it needs more studies like this, because this is just anecdotal, but my clinical experience in vape shops, particularly on COPD. We used to say, as smoking cessation specialists, that if you stop smoking when you have COPD, you will stop the harm, but you will stay at the level you were due to smoking. I have the impression on just a few subjects that they actually improve.
Mm-hmm. When you say
and I think one thing, and it could be also valuable for asthma, is the presence of propylene glycol.
Mm-hmm. In relation to that, obviously, it depends exactly when you switch. Because if you switch when you are 40, very early COPD, there's room for improvement. But when you switch later,
One of these people was already on oxygen, and it was more than 50 years.
Okay. If you switch them on quality of life, and exercise tolerance should improve for the simple fact that the CO level will be low, and that means that the possibility of having polluted the uremoglobin with metahemoglobin or carboxyhemoglobin will be less. So the possibility of circulating oxygen to a very elderly heart will improve, and exercise tolerance will improve accordingly. In terms of PG, we have completed a study on bacterial strain. We should submit it next week, and it looks specifically on a range of bacterial strains and the effect of e-liquids on this bacterial strain. No, this is e-liquid, but it's going to go on inhalation as soon as we get the first vapor machine. And that's the reason we created a core, so that we can collect the money and buy stuff. But in that particular study, there is a very interesting note. We tested more than 20 strains, and there are a couple who have been affected by the e-liquid with the PGVG. Haemophilus influenzae is one of them. And Haemophilus influenzae, here, is responsible for the exacerbation, respiratory exacerbation of asthma and COPD. So it is important that the treatment with the liquid didn't kill all cells. So it's very specific strain dependent. But we knew this information already from the years 40, 50, and 60s when they used PG aerosols to sanitize barracks or hospital wards. So it's an old idea reinvented. That's innovation too.